Welcome to the Living Your Legacy podcast.
I'm Kim Rain, a life coach and health mentor with over 13 years experience helping people lower their stress and anxiety, lose weight, sleep better and live happier, healthier, more purposeful lives.
I'm Helen Ranson. I've worked for 20 years as a self-employed psychotherapist and coach, helping clients of all ages and backgrounds who've experienced emotional issues, phobias and personal traumas.
The Living Your Legacy podcast is a quest to create amazing life stories, hang out in the moment and live a life full of joy.
Living Your Legacy is a podcast for anyone who wants to get off the sidelines and create the legacy they want to leave behind today.
Okay guys, so hi and welcome back to Living Your Legacy with myself and Helen. Hello.
Morning.
So Helen, I was going to start off this week by asking you what you've been up to live your legacy this week. What have you been doing?
Well, I actually had quite a tricky week with a midweek headache, which is never a good sign, is it? Especially as we were meant to be doing some recording, I think, that day, so I had to bail.
Maybe that's what brought it on.
I think it was. It was the prospect of having the chat with you. Yeah, so it made me regroup, actually, because I realised that I was doing too much. I was perhaps not being as structured as I now think I need to be with my living in the moment bits every week. So, yeah, I've made my week even more structured as far as me time's concerned. So I've got the 3 yoga sessions firmly in place now, paid up front for the sessions, so
Good.
I can't wimp out. My Yorkshire tendencies won't allow me to wimp out if I've paid. So that's good. That's made me feel structured, like I've got progress towards the end of the week. Yeah, so that's really important for me to have sort of got myself back into a good frame of mind. And I've done some fasting, which works for me. Sort of get me balanced and get me back on track food-wise when I have little blips or I feel a bit low about that.
Do you feel more energetic from doing that?
No, not at all. I feel absolutely bushed, but physically I feel knackered, but mentally I feel more in control. So I do feel more energized mentally. And I had a good read of Michael Mosley's Fast 800 book.
Right.
And it really inspired me. It made me remember, I've always been interested in fasting, and it reminded me of all the health benefits of cutting down on calories a few days a week or doing it as a binge lot if you can face doing a month of it. But so yeah, I feel inspired again. I've had to go back to basics a little bit this week with food and exercise, but I feel like hopefully I'm on the right track now. So yeah, a blip in the middle of the week, but went back to the toolkit, knowing what's good for me and made sure it was in place. And then, as I tell lots of my clients, each day is a new day. Yeah. You don't have to be defined by yesterday. So the fact you made a total cock-up of yesterday is irrelevant today. Today is the only day that matters. So let's make it a good one. So yeah, new page in the notebook, new day.
Strong finish to the week.
Here we go. Yeah, I'm finishing better than the started. Yeah, so that's always a good thing.
Take a few steps forward. I was living my legacy this week. I lived my legacy this weekend with a girls' weekend away, actually. And do you know what? 6 of us got together. And it's such a pain to organise 6 diaries, 6 people getting together. We've got one lives in France, one lives in Spain, a couple have got young children. There's so much, and it's such a hassle that you always think, oh, this is so much effort. But when we get together, it's such amazing memories. And, it is actually putting time aside to have fun and to play and to just be sort of carefree for a few days. And we did a bit of everything. We did a bit of running. We went for a run, which I haven't done for ages. Yeah, I went for a run in the sea. Correct. And we also had a bit too much vino. And we played a great game called, I can't remember what it's called now, Where's the Dude? That involves a blow-up dude. Oh,
you told me about that. Yeah.
And just laughed and laughed and laughed. And actually, it just kind of balances you out. And so I'm going for a strong finish to the end of the week, like you, because that then led to, getting back into it. So I've got back into it again today.
I think I've got a similar group of friends. We're called the Yorkshire Ladies on Tour. And you've actually met one of them at a yoga weekend. And we get together once a year, 6 of us. Some of us were at primary school together. So I've known these ladies A rather long time. I won't say how long, because that'll define me in an age bracket, which I'm not happy about being in anymore. And we go away and we just sort of reconnect immediately. And we just become who we're meant to be together. We just get our identities back. And for 2 days, it's great. We're going to Edinburgh in June.
Lovely.
So
we do it. We do it once a year, exactly the same. We don't see each other all the time. Some of them I haven't seen since last time. And do you know what? Each year, we're all at different levels. So usually 1 year, somebody's having sort of like something going on in their life, some sort of life changing. And then the next person's winning. And then we all go in ebbs and flows. And actually we just all get together, be ourselves and be authentic, let our hair down, 80s discos. There's usually a few tears and lots of laughs. And it's just a really great, comfortable environment, you know.
I think it levels you out, doesn't it? When you hear other people's stories like that, it just makes you think, well, do you know what? We're all the same. We're up and down all the time. We're all doing our best.
And we laugh about it, you know, like, oh, it was you this year. Now this year, you know, someone's going through a divorce. With all sorts of things, you know, happen. Bereavements. I can't think, but all sorts of things happen. And each year, it's just a great time to kind of reflect on where we are and who we are and where we're going. So. And get emotional, which brings us into this week. So this week we want to talk really about our emotions and the power of our emotions and the effects that they have on us and how powerful and liberating bringing them out of the shadows and letting go of them can be. Because as a society, we are really big on keeping our emotions under control. You know, we greet each other all the time with the question, how are you? But we only really want a filtered and positive answer quite a lot of the time, you know, and we actually start to feel uncomfortable if people start to say, you know, oh, well, actually, I'm not very good, or start to show their true emotions or their vulnerabilities. So today we want to bring that all out in the open a little bit and get down and dirty with our emotions. So for you, Helen, what do you think it is that makes it so hard to sit with our emotions?
Well, our natural inclination is to move away from stress. So to move away from anything that is dangerous for us, impacts on our survival, puts conflict in our lives. You know, it's just a natural tendency we have to stay safe and comfortable. So sitting with emotions, it isn't a natural default setting for us. And when we do, because emotions are so individual, and nobody can really get into the space that you're in when you're experiencing something, it leaves us feeling very vulnerable and isolated. And we don't want to feel that either, because we're a herd animal. We like to be the same as everybody else and not stand out from the crowd. So being in an emotional state makes us feel isolated, makes us feel judged. And it's the unknown as well, isn't it? Anxiety and fear that it's what's going to happen next.
And feel weak, I think, as well. It's a weakness, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely weak. And emotions as well they're not tangible. So they're this thing that happens to us, sometimes without premeditation or thought, and we can be overcome with these sensations and feelings that seem to come from nowhere. And so we can't rationalise them. They're not like thoughts. We can say, oh, well, yes, I know why I can't sleep because I've got this on my mind, or I know why I'm thinking this now because I've had this experience this week. That's where that comes from. But sometimes emotions are so sudden, they're so unexpected. They seem to have no root cause or bearing on anything. And we can't rationalise them. We can't put them in a sort of orderly filing system in our heads. And that moves us into a place of feeling very out of control and overwhelmed. So that's the nature of emotion. It's the intangible thing that it feels like it's happening to us and we have no control, rather than us controlling how we feel.
You just said that we can't necessarily pin them down to any specific thing. We don't know why they're there, our emotions sometimes. We don't know where they've come from. Do you think they've always come from somewhere?
Yeah, I do. I think that and emotions and stress and anxiety, they don't necessarily have to start from any major trauma. I think one of the problems with people feeling like they can approach therapy or counselling is that they feel like there has to be something wrong with them. It's a negative place, somebody's going to dredge through my childhood and pick out these incidents. And I don't really want to talk about them. So it's not actually the case. anxiety and emotion, negative emotion, doesn't necessarily have to start from a trauma. It can just be a slow build-up. It can be lots of small exposures to environmental stress, holistic stress, well-being, physical, mental, emotion, all sorts of things that are happening in our lives. And it's a gradual creeping up on us when we don't resolve issues as they appear. So we're very good at managing them and deflecting them and popping in place a coping strategy, an extra glass of wine here if we've had a bad day, or, we forget about things quite nicely when we've had a night's sleep. Things are always better in the morning, aren't they? And we tend to shelve things instead of resolving them. And so, that they can be present without our knowing why. Or there can be indications and things which have caused the symptoms, which we can easily identify on the other hand.
Yeah. Or sometimes, I find sometimes with people, and obviously, for me, I'm not on the therapy side of things, I'm more on the coaching side of things, but quite often what can be holding back can be stuff that in the past, some trauma or stuff that people don't even want to recognise, let alone talk about. They don't even want to recognise in their own heads. So, it can become really difficult to deal with that. So those emotions might keep bubbling up, and then they get pushed down and pushed down again. And then, like you, for me, most of what I see, particularly with anxiety and overwhelm, is it's lifestyle stuff. It's just that constant go, like we've just been talking about. And that can even be good things. It can be a girls' weekend away where you've, not slept quite enough and had too much vino and then you come back to normal life and you've got to try and get it, and that all gets on top of you. It can be
positive. That's for certain. We all know that feeling when we've sort of had too much of a good time over a weekend and it's gone on a little bit too long, and it leaves us feeling perhaps flat, bit of an anticlimax afterwards. But if you imagine that your emotions are on a flat sliding scale, and the extremes of the ends of those pieces of string, one might be fear or terror, and at the other end we've got excitement, happiness, joy, and we need to be somewhere in the middle. So we need to keep regrouping our emotions. It's okay to dip into those extremes, but we need to make sure that we come back to the middle regularly in order to rebalance ourselves out. So these extreme positive emotions can be just as overwhelming as negative ones.
I remember this story, but I remember one of my first realizations was when I first fell in love. I remember falling in love, and with my first boyfriend, I was so in love. And then that intense feeling, that intense high energy emotion doesn't last forever. And I remember being devastated and thinking it was all over when things did come back to that center of just, this is normal, and now we just get on with our lives together and we do normal things. And I was like, but where's that high? Where's that amazing high energy emotion? And we can't stay in those areas.
Well, it's not sustainable, as you say. It really isn't. And it's not a good place for us to be at either end of that scale, really. When I work with clients, I always say, I don't want you dancing on the tables. We don't want you at the other end of the scale in a panic attack, but I just want you to be okay. I want you, and I use that word okay very specifically to avoid using an emotional word, because the minute you set people an expectation of how they should feel, we introduce stress. So to me, just feeling okay, just feeling like, this is fine for now. I'll just carry on. Carrying on and functioning, although that sounds rather mundane, is where we need to be most of the time in order to be able to maintain those extremes when they do happen. Yeah. So it's a bit of a balancing act with emotions and understanding that, there is a place in the middle that we can all get back to quite easily where we will balance out and feel comfortable with ourselves again.
Do you think as well, I'm just thinking as well about my, particularly my son and I were having a conversation the other day, and I said, I remember being his age, and I love thrills and excitement, and I loved all that high energy sort of stuff, and it's like, but you can't live in that space. And I just, as I was talking to him, I was remembering I have come to terms with that, but as a teenager, I think it's really difficult to find that middle area.
It is, because you haven't developed the coping strategies.
You want life to be awesome all the time. And when it isn't, it's like, oh God, this is horrible. Why isn't everything wonderful happening? What do you think? Well, we know, but for the guys, like, what do you see when people aren't sitting with their emotions, when people are, because the great energy emotions are fine, but we've got the destructive low energy emotions, shame and fear and anger and guilt and even apathy. Those emotions that come up, and what I see is people then trying to shut them down, people pushing them down. I've done it before myself, where an emotion's come up and it's basically just not been convenient to be emotional at that point. And that's okay. But actually, when that goes on and on and on, and you keep pushing that down, what happens then? Where does that lead?
Well, the bigger the gap gets. Stress and anxiety always occur in a gap. So a really easy way to think about it, the gap between A and B. A is where you are in your car right now, driving to your appointments, and B is the appointment, and you hit a traffic jam. So you do there in 5 minutes, and your sat nav tells you it's going to be at least 15, 20. So that gap is where your stress sits. It's the place in which you aren't being yourself, or you're not being authentic. So the further you are away from behaving as your true self, the more masks you put on, the more you delay experiencing those emotions, the bigger they get, actually. And this is the thing about unresolved trauma, that without a major trauma in your life, very tiny unresolved stresses and strains on your emotional and mental environment can build up very quickly to overwhelm.
Yeah, I think that the thing is as well, we're not encouraged to show our emotions. We're not encouraged to let our emotions out. We're told to calm down as children, particularly because it hardwires into us, and then we pass it on. And I think back again to my kids, and if they were angry or cross or raging, it's like, well, calm down, or when they feel, sad or grief or abandonment, it's like, well, don't cry, which is, a big one, or don't be silly when we're scared, or don't be silly, it'll be fine, and actually what we're saying is we're putting those emotions by, we're sort of teaching them to, just that it's not convenient to see that emotion right now, so move on. And I do think about that. I think about things that I've learned in my adulthood as a coach and human behavior and stuff. And I look back on how in my children, and I'm like, oh my God, you poor things, all the things I did, but again, it's like that don't cry. Boys, about particularly with boys, I think being told not to cry, being not told not to show their emotions. I think that's quite a big one at the moment, because we have male suicide is high. We have
a huge problem with mental health with young men at the moment. And I do think that, it's an identity crisis that they are an emotional identity crisis that they're going through, that they actually don't know how to be anymore. They've sort of lost their way in our modern society, and they don't know quite what it takes to be a man.
But then
women are more clearly defined, don't you think? We nurture, we have children, we have a role set out for us, even if we choose not to take it, or we choose to combine it with work and careers. Men, I think, are in a place of flux where their role isn't as clear now. So their mental health needs to be more robust, actually, to get them through.
I think maybe their role isn't as clear as our role has become. We've taken a bit more power, haven't we? We've taken a bit more of the driving seat.
Yeah, I think it's become imbalanced.
But also, if you look at an emotional, I mean, I'm, people out there might disagree with me, and I wasn't around in these times. But, if you look back to, war times, or if you ever see anything on the TV from the 60s, men were very much stiff upper lip, keeping their emotions in, quite unemotional anyway. And I think in some ways we are encouraging men to become more emotional, to get more in touch with that sort of feminine side of their energy. But I also think at this point it's a really confusing time I think it's a confusing time for everybody, actually, if I'm honest.
I think it's a very stressful time for everybody. And I think we're exposed to an awful lot of environmental and social stress now, and we quickly get used to it without realizing we're getting used to it. So we have raised levels of anxiety without us really knowing that they're there. And they then become the new normal, and then we'll take on a bit more, and that becomes the new normal. And so on, bad habits develop. We avoid experiencing extremes of emotion because we don't have the coping strategies. We've not learned to deal with emotion. We've just put it to one side and carried on sucking it up. So, we use negative coping strategies until we start to fragment. And by fragment, I mean a sort of complete dislocation from your self-identity, which is what ultimately happens when people break down. We call it a nervous breakdown rather than the mental breakdown. It's quite an interesting one, that, because it is an emotional and mental combining of overwhelm and fragmentation. So if you imagine with your anxiety, it builds and builds and builds, and it's like a snowball rolling down a hill. It just picks up snow as it goes. And by the, what might start off to be something quite manageable at the top, something that if we had the inclination, the know-how and the will to deal with, we could do it quite quickly. If we leave it, if we don't resolve, or we ignore it, or we manage it, or we save it for later, then by the time we get to the bottom, it's a whole new ballgame. We're into a place where very few of us have the coping strategies to deal with complete overwhelm.
I think one of my biggest, you talk about that snowball effect, and I was just thinking one of my biggest teachings over the last few years is that anxiety comes in so many different forms. To me, anxiety was almost stress, overwhelm, but almost like a closing down. And what I'm now understanding more is anxiety is anger, it's hatred, it's...
Well, it's anything that isn't in the middle of that horizontal line of emotion, isn't it? Anything that isn't in the balance section at the middle, any extreme of emotion is a stressful place for us to be, whether it's negative or positive. So any of those emotions that reflects, an extreme feeling within us is putting us in an anxious place.
And then I think that those feelings, they fester. And if we don't let them out, if we don't talk about them, if we don't cry or whatever, one of the things for me is, on a positive way, one of the things that I deal with those sorts of emotions is I love a workout. I can quite often go into a workout and come out feeling a lot better. And I work out quite aggressively, we could say. I like to fling my weights around and I feel that I've come out and let off quite a bit of that emotional energy, and that's something that I sort of use to do it with. But when those emotions start to really build up, I think that where we keep pushing them down and keep them in the dark and keep them in the shadows, that's where they get their most power. And that's when the body starts to react, when we're holding that in our tissues. And we know, that actually it can slow down parts of your brain and the thinking process, just because the brain is trying to protect us. And so it's a natural reaction to want to push those feelings down. But it can, it can create patterns that lead to us becoming, sick and stressed and disconnected. And when things like that lay dormant and bubble away under the surface, you can get those outbreaks of anger and depression and things that you don't really understand. We need to cry more, I think.
Yeah, we need to do a lot more of a lot of things, but I think it needs to be done in a structured way where we can bring ourselves back into a balanced place at the end of it. And it's that ability to control and self-manage that is so lacking for us.
Do you think that's what you do in your work, though? You facilitate that?
Oh, I'd like to think so. Yeah, I mean, I like people to walk away from working with me with a toolkit, their own emotional toolkit, because it's far too easy to become attached to things in life, which is why I've mentioned it before in the podcast, I'm really reluctant to get involved in gimmicky latest fads on things, because, we all have the power within ourselves to address these situations, and you'll address them much more effectively and positively if you're managing them yourself, rather than disempowering yourself and giving your power to a therapist, a counsellor, a diet plan, a workout routine, that can go wrong or can fail. You need to put the power back in your own hands to manage your anxiety, and you need to learn and gain confidence and self-trust in yourself that, when things go wrong in those moments of extreme panic, which are very frightening and very isolating, that you can bring yourself back to a balanced place. And that's the way I work with people, and trying to show them the way to do that and to find their own way, actually, because we're all very different in our approach to anxiety.
I read a book by a guy, Dr. David Hawkins, called Letting Go, and it takes you through each of the emotions. I don't know if you've ever read it, and it's it is about being able to let go of it. And in order to do that, you need to sit with some of your emotions. You need to experience them, and that actually, if you can sit and experience those emotions, that next time they won't be quite so powerful. It's not that they won't come back again. So, the truth is that if if grief and you push those emotions down, but actually if you let them out, then maybe you're going to have a good old cry. You're going to have a good old rage, 15, 20 minutes. And actually then you're going to be able to bring yourself back to that point that you talk about. And it's not that it won't come again, but each time it comes, because you faced it, because you face that emotion, you can empower it, and it will begin to weaken. But it's having the strength to do it.
Yeah, that's very true. It's the fear of the fear, which is worse than the fear itself. So I talk a lot with my guys about anticipatory anxiety. It's that fear before things actually happen that is the most disempowering and debilitating anxiety, because that can sit with you for weeks, for days, for months before an event or something that you've got to face, and completely ruin your life for a huge chunk of time, as you run up to something that you're dreading or having to face. So by being able to break that down into a daily routine, we're able to find balance much more quickly, rather than letting that anxiety build up into something that then is very complex and difficult to deal with.
It is that whole thing, isn't it? Of like, if you've got an event in a few weeks' time that that's going to cause you anxiety or make you uncomfortable, you don't want to do, there might be 2 hours of your life. You can make the anxiety 6 weeks of your life by thinking about it and building it up.
And it's a choice. It simply comes down to a choice as to whether you're prepared to address your anxiety and manage it, which all sounds very simplistic. And in reality, it is. It is a simple choice you can make, but a choice that for most people is an unacceptable choice. It's one they don't want to face, having to sit alongside their emotions.
Yeah. It's because it's just not what we do, and it's seen as vulnerability. You and I talk about, I'm not great at being vulnerable. I'm learning it. I'm learning and learning and learning it. But I didn't realise how ungreat I am at being vulnerable until more recently, until I needed to be a bit more vulnerable, probably. But for you, anxiety is the product. Anxiety is the product of a lot of these emotions, negative emotions. For you, Helen, I know that you've got some quite good strategies for dealing with that, like you say about your toolkit and some of the anxiety management techniques. What you use EFT, don't you? What else do you?
I do. I use various techniques with people, depending on where they are with the anxiety and the way it's manifesting itself in them. So to start with, perhaps it would be good to just explain how anxiety works within us and within our heads, and try and make it really, really simple. It seems it could be all too easy to become hostage to our memories and thoughts and feelings, because actually we are just the sum of all our experiences, aren't we, as we go along. So we're this huge filing cabinet of every experience we've ever had and our reactions to those experiences at the time. They're all stored and held. So every memory, thought or feeling is just a download of information that our subconscious mind takes on board and stores. So it's like a tape recorder. I mentioned this in our last podcast, and it's always running. It's always going round on a loop, storing all our experiences on top of each other so that they're on hand whenever we meet anything new in our lives. So if we were to walk along the road and some strange looking animal stroke creature walked towards us, we would immediately delve into our subconscious mind and try and rationalize what we're seeing with our eyes and put it into some sort of category. And that's how we use the storage of information that we have in our head. We use it to interpret new experiences and the world around us. Unfortunately, our subconscious is hugely more powerful than our conscious mind, which is very rational and doesn't have an awful lot to do with emotion. So the subconscious tends to be our default setting. And once a download is in place, it can't be changed, but it can be taped over. And this is what we aim to do with our toolkit of managing strategies when we're looking at anxiety. So if you think about it, this is part of our fallibility as a human being. So we have this intellect, this thing called intellect, that helps us to understand. But basically, we're controlled by this primitive downloading system that doesn't select these memories or organize them properly. It just piles them into our subconscious. And even though we know, just because we have this intellect and we can internalize our understanding and awareness, it doesn't mean to say that we can automatically change our reaction to things. So we know that when we see a spider running across the room, it's completely inappropriate to run for the hills. But our intellect tells us that this is ridiculous. I'm going to get on a plane next week and it's the safest way to travel. So our intellect, our conscious mind is telling us all the time, yeah, but this really doesn't make sense. Our subconscious, which is just, imagine it's like a tape recorder running along in the background, ignores the conscious mind. It's just acting as a storage system. So these memories, these experiences all become negative habits for us in our heads, and we default to them. And they can become devastating for our well-being because the more entrenched they become, the more that we repeat experiences and react in the same way to them, the stronger the recording gets, doesn't it? And then, we have a bigger and bigger job to change them. I put a little thing on our Instagram, which I found fascinating because, I always keep going on about practice. Everything, training our mind and training our emotions involves practice. It's not just our physical body that we need to train. Training our heads is vital. So rehearsal is the key to everything. So especially if we practice things when we're relaxed and in a relaxed state, which is why lots of the therapeutic procedures I use with people are done in a meditative state or in a state of enhanced relaxation. So it takes about 400 repetitions to create a new synapse in the brain, to create a new habit and remove an old one.
I didn't know that.
So that's quite a lot. Yeah, 400 repetitions. However, if you're doing it whilst you're relaxed and you're at play, it's about 10 or 20.
Are you talking about being like hypnotized or just?
Yeah. I'm saying so that if we try to change our habits and have an impact on our reactions when we're in a relaxed state, the impact is hugely different to when we're stressed. So the key to lots of the practices that I use with people involve relaxation, involve bringing people into that emotional state in the middle of that horizontal line of emotions where they are balanced and they're okay. And their subconscious mind can be in an altered state of consciousness where it can respond much more quickly to a change in habits. So certain techniques can be used then in a therapeutic way to overlay new thoughts and new emotional reactions to old experiences. So something like EFT, which emotional freedom technique, which is one I love actually because it's so simple and it's a technique you can teach people very, very quickly, and it has an immediate effect. It's brilliant. It falls on the therapeutic spectrum somewhere between hypnosis and acupuncture. So it's an acupressure technique using the hands, which a person does on themselves, or you can do it on other people if they're in great distress, or if you're working with a child and they're incapable of doing it. And that's a great one to have a look at.
Is that where you would hit on that point? Because I've had it done before where they go all around your face, certain
That's it. Yeah, there are points. I mean, there are many acupressure points on the body, but we rely on I rely on no more than 10 points on the face and hand to simplify it for people so that they can learn it quickly. And the effect it has is that it removes the emotion and reaction from a situation. So we can have a situation that might be caused by a very traumatic memory. So if I ask you to think of that memory, emotion is attached to it. So it might be, say, a bereavement. I might say, tell me about the bereavement you just had. And you might have a lot of grief or sadness or emotion attached to recalling that thought. What EFT will help you with is breaking that chain, breaking the attachment of the emotion to the thought. So we can still have memories, but they don't necessarily have that attachment to raw emotion.
Right.
The emotion is softened. In fact, it can be removed completely so that we can have clearer, more positive memories of things that have happened to us in the past without the negative emotion being attached to that memory. So that's a great one. I use it lots for phobic responses and panic attacks. Brilliant one, because it's a toolkit that people carry around with them all the time.
I've seen, and I've been told to do it halfway along your collarbone. Was that one?
It's a grief point. Yeah, that's a grief point. Yeah. Very, very powerful at subduing your feelings of loss.
So different points relate to different emotions.
They do. Yeah. And it's something that we can have a look at putting out there at some point.
Really,
perhaps on our website when we get it set up. I've got certainly a CD that I recorded explaining exactly how people use that. And we can go into a bit more detail with that one.
What else?
Other things like mindfulness, meditation, and hypnosis, they're all techniques that alter our state of awareness using the subconscious to rewire our hard drive and replace negative thoughts. Mindfulness, meditation, and hypnosis, all along a similar line, using a relaxed state to empower ourselves to rewire our subconscious and change the reactions and the emotions that are stored in there. And visualization is another great way. Use that quite a lot in sport. We call it blueprinting in sport, where we use mental rehearsal to move through future events. So where you imagine yourself going through a scenario and you bring lots of sensory awareness into it. And in sport, of course, we're winning.
Yeah.
We use that visualization and that imprinting to go through the finish line, through the tape, and we're running fast. And they're all linked together. And depending on what the client's presenting would determine what I would teach them and what they would use.
So sometimes I'm just thinking, when I've done stuff with anxiety, which obviously is more of when I deal with anxiety, it's more of the day-to-day stuff. It's not linked to trauma, like as you're talking about necessarily. Is that what you mentioned about is having some control over the situation? So the future thing, imagining yourself going into the room, asking your boss for a raise, standing up in front of your colleagues and giving the speech and replaying that. And also sometimes thinking, what's the worst thing that could happen here? And what am I going to do if that happens? And also, what is the probability consciously of that happening? Which I get what you're saying, though, the subconscious mind can sometimes not be that interested in rational thoughts.
Well, it literally can't process rational thoughts. It doesn't have that capability. It's just a storage mechanism. So it's our conscious mind that does all the processing and working out, rationalizing. Something you just mentioned there, which I think is worth mentioning, that word trauma. Trauma doesn't always have to be big. I think, particularly in the area of work I work in now, end of life care or people who are very life limited, people understand that concept of trauma, but trauma can't be compared. So we're talking about anxiety here. Anxiety doesn't have to be big. Anxiety occurs at the point at which it has a negative influence on your life. So I think that word is a problem in that it inhibits people from coming forward for help and for therapy because they feel they don't fit that category.
Or it's not bad enough, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They just feel, oh, well, it's just work. It's just overwhelm. I'm just really busy at the moment. They rationalize it into, I've just got too much on my plate, not enough time for me. Well, we're talking about trauma there. And I think we have to be very careful that we don't misuse the word trauma, that people accept that being post-trauma can be just being post a difficult time in your life when you were sort of reaching the point of overwhelm and were out of control. It doesn't have to be anything sinister or even life-changing. It can just be when your whole emotional system has been completely overloaded and you've reached your limits of coping.
But you see, so from what you're saying there, and I guess that's quite, because for me, coming from that from a more coaching point of view, I'm like, okay, you can learn to cope with that. But actually, if you are talking about mini traumas, if work is overwhelming, if you're got too many things on the go, if it something to me is you're not in alignment with your path in life. You're out of alignment. So
absolutely.
Actually, I guess I'm looking at it in two separate fields, in that there's your field of, or as you're saying, maybe I'm wrong, really. You don't have to have had a massive trauma to come and see someone like you and talk it through and work it out for it to, and for it to be debilitating in your everyday life. But for me, sometimes those feelings are a real indication that you are not on the right path and that actually something needs sorting out in your life.
Definitely. And I think that's my awareness too, that's how anxiety and trauma are perceived, which is why I really wanted to do this project, to sort of say to people that, we really shouldn't be letting our lives become traumatic and go into overwhelm. We should be doing these simple things every day of our lives in order to live a full and purposeful life without the need for giving our time away then to restructuring and reorganizing our mental health. It shouldn't need to get that far. We should be living each day and being aware of these things now. Unfortunately, lots of the people I see are usually at the end of the road, that they're in crisis or for one reason or another. And that seems a waste of time to me. I'd like people to know how simple and easy it can be to manage your emotional and mental health earlier in life. I talk to my kids all the time about it and encourage them to be very mindful of and noticing of their mental health. And I think they're quite good actually at looking at knowing what works for them in order to take them out of a negative place that they're in.
In fairness, our children are probably growing up in a time when, although it is quite a lot of strain on them, but there's certainly a lot more awareness of mental health and being aware of it and how it can manifest.
It's certainly talked about a lot more, isn't it? I mean, it used to be a sort of hidden secret and not a very valid form of illness. But I think things are changing finally, which is great news. It's probably a consequence of it not having been taken seriously in the past that we are where we are. But I think they are exposed not only to a lot more stress now, but also to the possibilities of dealing with it, which is fantastic.
I think one thing I just want to add on to before we go to closure, before we run out of time, is that one thing that I use with my clients a lot is the question, is it true? When they're getting into those anxious thought patterns and things are becoming overwhelming and they're thinking, I can't think of an example, but I'm not good enough, or everyone's going to laugh at me if I say that, or if I speak my truth, then nobody's going to like me anymore, or whatever it is it true? Because actually what we do so often is deal with our thoughts and what we think might be happening, or what we think might go wrong, or what we think someone else is thinking of us. And actually, if we deal with the evidence, if we deal with what is actually we know to be true, then it can be, again, using that conscious mind, and you're still battling with that subconscious and the record of all the stories and all the things that have happened to you, and the way the body keeps, huge score of everything, of all your experiences. But actually, if you can say yourself, is it true? I think it really helps you kind of bring it into some context. Take the thought to court. That's what someone said to me once. You've got to take that thought to court and imagine that you're judge and jury, and you know, is it valid? And for me, the other thing is thinking about anxiety is quite often about that out of control feeling, that feeling out of control. So it's looking at, okay, there's a lot of factors in this situation that I can't control. I certainly can't control the unknown, but what can I control? What can I do? And what is the worst that can happen? And actually bring the conscious mind into play and rationalise it, and it's repeating those passions and repeating those thoughts. And I think, you know, I know for myself, I used to go off on all sorts of tangents of, oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? And and make all sorts of stuff up in my head. And just by using that, hang on, what's the truth here? What do you actually know to be truth before you start reacting? Has really, really helped me in a lot of situations. I think, well, I can only deal with the truth. And 9 times out of 10, or 9.9 times out of 10, most of the other stuff I'm making up in my head and never comes to fruition anyway. But it's dealing with that.
Absolutely.
So what are your 3 big takeaways that you want to leave people with, Helen, on thoughts of that?
Oh, really simple this week. Back to basics, back to learning about your own personal triggers. What actually starts the anxiety process for you? We're all different here. We all have different triggers in our life. And we need to work on stopping this anxiety as soon as it appears. So that's where the strategies then come into place. But in the first place, noticing yourself, getting to know yourself, checking in with yourself daily, and assessing your own mental and emotional health daily is really, really important so that you can notice the start of that spiral. Then creating your own personal toolkit, things that I do when I'm stressed, strategies that I put in place when I'm stressed, things that I know that work for me, however simple. It might be taking a hot shower. It might be putting the TV on for half an hour. It might be walking. It might be going out into your garden. It might be ringing a friend for a chat. Whatever it is that will distract you away from the start of that anxiety spiraling, do it. Meditating, yoga, exercise, whatever works for you. Find your toolkit and do it. And then practice. Just practice. These things will, as I've tried to explain, will not come naturally. We're on a negative default setting from the moment we're born. We have to rehearse being positive and changing our reactions to things. So practice is the key. And that really, needs to be done every day.
Okay. I think for mine is that question, is it true? Is it true? Am I dealing with facts here, or am I making this up in my head? I think the other thing is understanding that it is okay not to be okay. It is okay to let those emotions bubble over sometimes, and to have a good cry or a good rant, or, lock yourself in your bedroom and punch your pillow, whatever you need to do. I love a bit of boxing for that sort of thing. But it is okay that everything's not okay. We don't have to be like that all the time. And then my third thing, I think, is to get it out, talk about it, journal it, whatever it is for you. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a professional, and to see what there is to what lessons are in there, what lessons are in what's going on for you and those emotions, and just questioning. If you notice that you're always getting angry, or you're always feeling anxious, or you're always feeling sad, or think, what is causing me to, and actually look for the truth and what's really going on, so that you can start delving into it and putting some things right. Coolio. Absolutely.
Well said.
Mic drop.
Coolio.
So, ladies and gents, if you're gentlemen listening too, guys, listen, give us a share, tell your friends, come and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. We love you guys listening to us and helping us spread the love, and helping your friends, family, colleagues, and everybody out there just to live their legacy and make the most of every single day. We will see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye for now. So that's all for now. Go away, enjoy the rest of your day, and have a good think about it. We hope you enjoyed the Living Your Legacy podcast. If you did, subscribe and come back for the next one. If you didn't, well, there's no accounting for taste.